We are about to begin another episode of the Prosperitant webinar series. From their unique perspective as dentistry's embezzlement experts, Prosperitant's team brings you information you will not find anywhere else. Now sit back and relax while Prosperitant's Amber Weber, Wendy Askins, and David Harris address the issues that are important to you.
Well, hi everybody. It's that time. We're going to get started. I am thrilled to be here with my two terrific co-hosts, Amber Weber and Wendy Askins, both from Texas. Amber is a senior fraud examiner with us. She's been with Prosperitant for about 2 years. And her area of focus is investigations and also something we'll probably touch on a little bit later called Office Protection System, which is where we help people protect their practices. And my other co-host, also from Texas, our longest serving examiner, Wendy Askins. Wendy heads our orthodontic department and also does a fair amount of work in orthodontic pediatric practices. But she has really seen every corner of Prosperitant and has a huge amount of expertise. So terrific to be back with you both again and with our audience. So today we've got a really neat topic. We're going to talk about serial embezzlers. And by serial embezzlers, I mean people who steal in one practice and get caught and get fired, and then miraculously 2 weeks later they're working across the street or across town. And they do it repeatedly, in some cases many times. So we're going to talk a little bit about that group and what we can learn from them, and there are a lot of good lessons here. Just a couple of preliminaries. Our webinar our sort of formal content will go on for about an hour, give or take. We will tackle questions and answers after that. We will also take some of them during the presentation if we can. So if you think of a question, don't feel like you have to wait till the end. Enter it right into the question box that's in Zoom, and if we can take it during the presentation, we will, and if not, we'd love to get to it at the end. We are recording this, and by sometime tomorrow, we'll have the full session available. So if you have to leave in the middle, don't worry about it. And we've had a number of people who we've suggested, I know you can't be here, but register anyway, and we'll get back to you with the recording later. So the full session will be available tomorrow. We normally cut out the pre-show, but I will either include it in the recording or probably we'll just make it available separately. At the end of the session, roughly, you'll get an email from us, and it will have a link to claim your continuing education if that's important to you. And I'd like to thank our friends at Altura Periodontics in Colorado, because they're the people who make that available to us. But we'll give you a link where you can certify your attendance and then get your CE credit, and also some other things. And our next webinar, please mark your calendar, will be August 19th. We'll be at the same time, so 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific time. And our theme there is going to be picking up the pieces, what to do when the unthinkable happens. And of course, the unthinkable is embezzlement. So we're going to talk about the things to do when you suspect or you confirm that you've been a victim.
Thanks, Dave. Well, we are Prosperitant, and we are the largest dental embezzlement firm in the entire world. So we're also accounting geeks as well as investigators. So we love to know what the statistics are about how embezzlement is impacting our dental industry. So what we know is that in 2019, ADA published their study. Now, it was a study of self-reporting of how many of ADA members have been impacted by embezzlement within their career. So they're self-reporting, and what they found was that 53% of the participants in the survey reported that they weren't quite sure if they had been embezzled or not. They didn't think so, but they just really didn't know. But what is absolutely fascinating for us as investigators is that 47% of the reportees had indicated that they had been embezzled from, and a little bit under half of that 47% had actually been embezzled from more than once. I mean, look up here for the 4 or more times. 8% of the respondents had said that they had been embezzled from 4 or more times. That's absolutely just blows our mind. It's completely outstanding. But what we also know about embezzlement is that there is a recidivism rate for people that embezzle, or what we call serial embezzlers. So what's the difference between someone who is just stealing, this is their first occurrence of stealing from your practice, versus a serial embezzler that goes around cannibalizing other dental practices? Dave's going to talk about that in a little bit. We don't actually know the statistics for the recidivism rate. What we do know for all offenders or incarcerated offenders in general is that 77% of individuals who have been incarcerated and released, 77% of them reoffend or will be re-arrested within 5 years of their negative consequences that were imposed because of their negative actions. So 77% is approximately what we can expect in the dental industry as well.
Absolutely mind-boggling. Whoops, Amber, no sound coming out. Uh-oh, Amber's gone mute on us. Oh, we got you now.
Okay, now it told me I was sorry. So the next question is embezzlement gender specific? Our friend and investigator, Kelly Paxton, has kind of coined this phrase of pink collar crime. Because dentistry and a lot of professions that are care oriented, such as nursing, dentistry, and childcare, we have seen an increase in female embezzlers by 40%. However, embezzlement by males have only increased about 4% since 1990. One of those main reasons is males may embezzle from dental practices, but the administrative positions in our pink collar career are overwhelmingly female. So that's an interesting statistic about if embezzlement is gender specific.
Yeah, and Amber, we get asked the question a lot because when you see our slideshows, you know, they're predominantly females and relatively few males. So sometimes, you know, people ask me, do males embezzle? And I think you've answered the question. They absolutely do, but it's just a factor of how few of them work in administrative positions in dentistry versus how many females.
Correct.
So let's meet a serial embezzler, and there she is. Whenever I give you a serial embezzler's name, I stumble a little bit because they have many names. And this lady has gone by Lisa George, Lisa Jurgen, a different spelling of Lisa, another different spelling of Lisa. She lives in my hometown, which is Halifax, Canada. And she's had dentists, and it didn't stop with dentists. She has been known to rent expensive apartments and then be unable to pay the rent and just kind of fight eviction for as long as she can. She's also set up some phony businesses and nailed a couple of banks. I've had the occasion to fire her at least once. She claims a lot of education that she doesn't have, including that she has finished, or in some cases has almost finished her law degree. She is always well-dressed, very polished in her grammar and speech, looks professional, interviews really well, knows practice management software really well. And the only thing that's really interrupted her stealing is some visits to the Crowbar Hotel. She's been charged at last time I counted with 110 counts of fraud and has served 32 months in jail. But when she gets out, what does she do? She goes back to what she knows best, which is working in dental practices. So that's our adversary here. We're going to talk a little bit more about the personality characteristics of that adversary and maybe how to recognize them a bit better. But this is who we're dealing with. We kind of meet two interesting groups at Prosperitant. And the first group is the serial embezzlers who we're talking about tonight. The second group we refer to as the $1 Million Club. So this is a thief who has stolen more than $1 million from their practice. And here's one of each. The lady on the left, Irina, again, some different last names, is in my mind the Energizer Bunny of serial embezzling. So she has worked for and stolen from about 15 practices. The amount that she's stolen in total is a little bit tough to pin down, but it's at least $200,000. What I'll say about Irina is that even with all of the practice that she's had at stealing, she's not a great thief. The stuff she does is fairly basic. There's really very little effort to conceal what she's doing. She really tries to find doctors who she thinks will not pay a whole lot of attention to the front office part of the practice, and then she just takes money. One of them described her as a piranha wearing Prada shoes. On the other side, we see Christy Corral. And you can see from the little logo in the corner that she's a fairly accomplished thief. She worked for the same practice for 15 years, and from that practice, she took over $1 million. I would describe Christy as an artistic thief. She gave a lot of thought to concealment. Her stuff was very sophisticated. She carefully took into account what her doctor looked at and what he didn't. And she was able to do what I'm sure Irina would have liked to do, which is find one doctor and just ride them for a long, long time. So the good news for us is that, as I say, serial embezzlers really are not generally that sophisticated in how they do it. And when you look at Irina, what she was really good at was getting hired. She got caught 15 times. You would think that somebody who got caught once would learn from it and make it a little bit harder to get caught the second time or the third time or the 10th time. And Irina never really progressed to that. So that's the weakness that the serial embezzler has.
So another interesting thing about what we see with embezzlers is they kind of have the personality of a chameleon. So let's talk about the definition of a chameleon. We all know that a chameleon can change its colors depending on the situation. Well, we see the same thing with a lot of embezzlers who are repeat offenders. They interview well. They are allowed to adapt to the situation that conforms to what they're trying to accomplish. Another interesting fact about chameleons, so we've got to look at this with embezzlers. There are over 202 species of chameleons, and they come in a wide range of colors. So when you look at a future employee's resume, you've got to look at it from that perspective. What you see isn't always what you get. They're going to change those colors depending on the situation when they see the opportunity. There are some times that chameleons are not able to change their colors. This is called reptile dysfunction. So sometimes if they get in a situation where they can no longer change those colors, you found out what type of chameleon they are. So the main thing you have to remember here is really to be thorough and look for holes in their resume. Make sure what the information that they're providing you is not false. you're checking their references, and you have a good way of making sure that they're just not showing you some colors that are not true.
Sorry, I'm in control of the slides here, and sometimes I get excited and move them too fast. That was me. Sorry, Amber.
It's all good.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, Dave, we've had a request that you turn up your volume. Can you do
I
that?
turn up my volume. Okay, I'll move my microphone closer. I hope that's I hope that's better.
It sounds better to me, but maybe.
Does it? Okay, thanks. Yeah,
maybe
sorry, I didn't. Thanks for letting me know.
Okay, so why do people steal in the first place? Well, we know through Creasy's study and basically developed what's called the fraud triangle. And the fraud triangle is based on a three-pronged system in which it describes what moves a person from not being willing to steal to being willing to steal. So if you take two different people given the exact same circumstances, why does one person give over to the desire and one person doesn't give over to the desire? Well, what Creasy taught us was that the elements of thievery comes along with, number one, a certain type of pressure. Number two, rationalization in our own brains of why it's okay. And then number three, we need an opportunity or a doorway. Now, practice owners or business owners don't have any control over the first two aspects of the fraud triangle, which is pressure and rationalization. The only place where the business owner comes in is through opportunity. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, how to block those opportunities with our systems. But pressure comes from either need or greed. So if you have someone, let's say, oh my gosh, don't we have a lot of people in the COVID situation right now who have either lost their jobs or they have been laid off. Those people would be tempted to steal because they have a need to provide for their family. Let's say they're behind on their mortgage and they're going to get foreclosed on. So they need a little extra money, so they're going to take a little extra money from you to help pay for those. The other pressure point is just flat out greed. And now with serial embezzlers, we find the reason that they continue to steal really has nothing to do with need, but it simply has to do with greed. So Dave, do you want to bring up the next point? There we go. Thank you. So with a serial embezzler, you have the sociopathic lack of remorse coupled with the narcissistic self-imposed importance in your practice. And all of those work together to create an entitlement mentality, which means, yeah, they're going to steal from you, but technically you owe it to them. So here is what the internal conversation would be with a thief. It would be, well, I'm here before the doctor's here. I get here before the doctor. I leave later than the doctor. The only reason this business is successful is because I keep that scheduling book full for the doctor and I make this practice run perfectly. But yet the doctor gets to drive a Lexus and I don't. And I should be able to drive one just like he does or she does. So Dave had mentioned our favorite serial embezzler, Irina, a moment ago. Let's hear what Irina has to say about her rationalization for the theft that she committed.
Because you're the greedy asshole that one day comes to work with Ferrari, next day with Porsche, and builds root canals for bleaching. And yes, even if I did take 1,000 here, 1,000 there, it wasn't hundreds of thousands, and the doctors were doing more fraud than I ever did.
Okay, so, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry, how's my audio now, Wendy? Is it better?
I thought it was good, yeah.
Okay, good, yeah.
Okay, maybe somebody from the audience can chime in and let us know how the sound is. But it's interesting to me because you hear two main things, two main reasons, just the sentences run right in together. Number one, you're the a-hole who shows up with a Ferrari, right? So there's a bit of jealousy there. about why the doctor gets to drive such a nice car, but I don't. And then number two, she blames the doctor and says basically, well, the doctor was overbilling or false billing the insurance companies. Yeah, so what? I may have, did the same thing only for a couple of $1,000s, but the doctor did it way more than I did. So that is their rationalization. So as far as the different approaches that thieves use to get into your practice to gain your trust and to elevate themselves within your practice to a higher status, there we go, thank you very much, is that really when they come in, now we're talking about serial embezzlers, remember, a serial embezzler goes from office to office to office, cannibalizing the revenue from each individual practice. Their schemes usually last somewhere between 2 to 3 years before they start unraveling themselves and they get close to getting caught. And so they'll quit one place and they'll move on to the next and do the same thing. But what's happening is when they move on to the next office, you think you're interviewing them, but they're actually interviewing you. They're actually looking at how well your office communicates, how well your staff members communicate with each other. They're looking at the systems you have. And the more chaotic an office is, the more they sense that the office is chaotic and unput together without systems, that's going to be their target office. Because the way that they elevate themselves to trust, to gain your trust, is that they often have a savior complex. And they come in and they say, oh, well, there's so much wrong with this office and our procedures aren't done the correct way and we have some errors going on here. I can fix all that. I can fix all that. So what they do is they elevate themselves, they get in close and become deeply enmeshed with the business owner so that the business owner doesn't suspect whatsoever that they're stealing from you. That they're stealing from you. They often want to take control of the clinical aspect as well as the business aspect. They often get really involved in your personal lives. I remember the very first office that I worked at when I came into dentistry some 30 years ago. My very first experience with theft was by the receptionist whom everyone in the office loved. I mean, she would babysit the doctor's children for him. She would run personal errands for him and his wife. She became completely enmeshed in the doctor's life as well as the team members' lives. So what this person might appear as, or the characteristics that they might appeal to other team members, is that one avenue is that they appear to be a sugar mama for the rest of the team. So for example, I had a case where the thief was manipulating payroll records. Well, while she was manipulating her own payroll records, she was throwing out little bonuses to the rest of the staff. Here and there, she would just throw out a bonus to them. And then she would go to that individual staff member and she would say, you know, Sally, I think you're such a great member of this team that I gave you an extra $200 bonus on your payroll check this week. Don't tell the doctor. Well, and the truth is what she had done is, yes, she had given Sally an extra $200 that was unauthorized by the business owner, but she had given herself a $10,000 bonus on her own payroll check that was unauthorized by the doctor. So there's the sugar mama on one hand, but on the other hand, they can also be very controlling because remember, they have to keep control of their accounts. They don't like anybody asking them questions. They don't give transparent answers, and they certainly don't want you asking questions or going through and trying to validate what they've told you.
Those are great points, Wendy. And looking at the approach, we want to talk about the manifestations that we'll see happen with people who are embezzling. One of the main things that we'll see is when they are asked questions about their role or what's been completed, or if things were not done correctly, they've played the victim. They've had a hard life, they have personal issues, they have things that make them just mentally doing more than what they should be completing. The other thing to look for is, does this go beyond other parts of their work life? Do they volunteer a lot? Are they involved in a lot of extracurricular activities? Wendy, I know a case that you just recently had where embezzlement occurred after you had confirmed that outside of the dental world. This person was very involved in horse activities and was also active in those many organizations. Myself, being involved in horses and agriculture, I know that world, and I know that it takes a lot to sometimes achieve the goals that you have in that industry. Once it was revealed to us at Prosperitant that she had also embezzled from those organizations that she actively participated in. And so this is where any relationship, business or personal, that transparency that you just talked about is very important. The other thing to really look at is, a lot of times these people who can commit embezzlement, they're not doing it to build equity or hold on to what they steal. A personal story I have from growing up on a cattle ranch, we caught somebody stealing some cattle from us. Most people want to accumulate cattle to build a herd or create value, but that doesn't work that way. They just want to let it flow through their hands and go on to the next thing, and they continue that pattern. A great example of that transparency is like looking through a prism. If you ask a staff member or the neighbor down the road what happened to your property, they will clearly give you the details and have no issues answering that. However, if they have that issue of why don't you trust me, or they blame someone else, I had too much responsibility, I'm doing all of this work for everybody, and they don't want to be clear and transparent in that answer, that's also an issue. And I know, Wendy, you had also told me a story about a case that when the embezzler was confronted, their first response was, oh my goodness, you don't trust me? Absolutely. They had built that personal relationship with that office. And then later on, the embezzler's husband notified the doctor that, yes, she had admitted to him that she had stolen money. So all these manifestations and different personalities can happen, but the key is you got to make sure there's transparency. When you ask questions of that team member, they are not afraid to give you detailed, precise answers. Moving on from that, just like we do in all aspects of our life, you have to protect your practice. We protect ourselves. We put automatic locks on our cars when we walk away, so when we go in that restaurant, our personal belongings are going to be safe in that car. So same thing when we look at our office and our business, we have to have some form of protection in all aspects. You know, a dental office has a lot of moving parts, so make sure you delegate the duties properly throughout your team members. You have a good hiring system, daily systems, and you're observing what's happening with your team so you can see how's their personality. Do they have any, are they manifesting any qualities or things that I need to be concerned about, so that you're aware early on if you are truly having great steps for protection in your practice.
Absolutely. Something that a lot of dentists struggle with is the difference between delegation and advocation. And the best way I can describe this to you is that delegation, which you have to do to function as a dentist. I mean, you simply can't do it all. You can't be the front desk and the dental assistant and the hygienist and the dentist and make a living. So dentistry, both clinically and administratively, requires you to offload some things to people. The really important question, though, is what their responsibility back to you is. And abdication is really when you say to somebody, I'm giving you this job to do, and I don't ever want to hear about it again. And that's the one that gets you into trouble. Delegation is I'm giving you a job to do, but there's some accountability back to me. And I'm going to check on things. I'm going to watch what goes on. I'm going to expect reporting. I'm going to expect transparency, to go back to a point that Amber made on the previous slide. And something that a lot of dentists struggle with is that they need to be a little bit skeptical. The mere fact that it comes out of your computer and it's nicely formatted does not make it true. I think you're muted, Wendy.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was answering some questions.
Oh, good for you.
Okay, all right. So the very best way to stop embezzlement from happening in your practice is to stop a serial embezzler from getting through your hiring protocols. Or in other words, to have stringent requirements for your hiring. Now, if you have listened to our prosperitant Power Hour webinars before, you know that we've done one on forensic hiring. And I invite you to go to the Prosperitant website and look under Media, Prosperitant Power Hour, and watch that recorded webinar on forensic hiring. It will give you a wealth of information that will be really good for you to know, and how to establish your protocol for hiring. Number one, hey, who are you hiring? Right? It's amazing how many of us as dental professionals, we tend to lag behind other industries in the individuals that we hire. Also, it would be interesting to know how many of you during a hiring process have someone prove to you who they are upon meeting them, upon your initial interview with them. It's kind of like Dave said a couple of slides ago. We've introduced you to some serial embezzlers, and sometimes they can have 3 to 5 to 6 different names that they go by. So on the initial interview with them, just take a cup or look at their driver's license number, look at their driver's license and make sure that the name and the address on the driver's license matches the name and address that they've given you that is on their application form that they've filled out. Now, if you don't do anything else about hiring, forgive me for saying that, Dave, but if you don't do anything else, please, please, please call former employers to verify employment. Now, personal references that an applicant gives you, no, don't even bother with them, right? Because I'm going to give you the name of somebody that hates me, right? I'm going to give you the name of, I'm going to selectively give you the name of people who like me because I want you to hire me. But when you call a former employer, it gives you more of a general roundedness of what type of employee that person was when they worked for someone else. You can also do a criminal records check. I absolutely love this idea, especially if you're hiring office managers or office administrator, financial coordinators, or say a receptionist at the front desk. One of the things that you need to be concerned about when doing a criminal records check is that there is a delay in reporting in our systems. So here's what I mean. If you're in the United States, I'm in Texas and I want to hire a new office manager for my practice. I have an individual from Michigan that is moving to Texas, and so they've sent me their resume and I'm looking through them. I interview her, I like her, so I go to do just a criminal records check for that person. If that person, number one, in Michigan, has committed a crime and they have been charged, but not yet convicted, just charged, which means they haven't gone through the court system yet. You will not see that particular charge show up on a criminal records check. So I'm a little cautious about that. Another thing I'm cautious about is if you don't expand your search wide enough with including different counties, you could miss something. All of the counties within the United States, for example. That's why speaking to former employers is so essential. Also, don't forget the Google and how much the Google can help you. A social media scan, their Facebook page, LinkedIn, Instagram. I find it's interesting to go on those particular sites, especially if I have a suspect that I'm investigating. I like to go to that person's Facebook page, and if it's public, I absolutely can do that without any conflict of interest. Go to that individual's Facebook page and look at the type of conversation that they're having with their peers. As well, you can look at the grammar, their language, how their standard of living is. Do they look like they live beyond the standard of living for what their job qualifications and how much they make? So that can also give us a great insight into who it is that we're hiring.
Yeah, I want to amplify something Wendy said about, quote, character references. I always say to people, you know, if my dog could talk, he would give me a wonderful reference. Why? Because I feed him and I scratch his belly. He's not really objective. And speaking with somebody's parish priest or their 8th grade science teacher or their former basketball coach, you know, that information is not objective and it's not in the work context. So we really need to talk to former employers. And if somebody has something to hide, they will go to all kinds of gyrations to make that conversation not happen. For example, they will give you phone numbers that they say are former employers, but are really their uncle who's going to give them a good reference. That's the kind of stuff that we just can't fall into. And I'll just repeat something we said at the beginning. You know, if you have questions, just use the question part of Zoom. And Wendy and Amber, when they're not presenting a slide, are usually pretty busy dealing with some of the questions. So by all means, feel free to write them down whenever you get a second.
So the next thing we want to talk about, a form of protection, is systems. So, you know, you've done the hiring, you've researched everything, you've made sure everything checks out. Kind of like buying a car. We make sure the car has a good warranty, everything's going to hold up. But if you just drive the car off the lot and you don't understand what systems need to be followed, later on, you're going to have major issues with that car. The same goes for your team members. So for any business, when you hire an employee, they can be your biggest asset, but also your greatest risk. Every night, your assets walk out the door and go home and face everyday pressures at home. Family issues, financial pressures, and so many more. The list goes on. So what does that tell us? Employees need clear boundaries. If they know that you are looking, they often won't take the chance of getting caught. If they think there's a chance of getting caught, they won't jeopardize their job security or cause family embarrassment. So that's where, after you hire, you really have to have some great systems in place. Here is where it's important that you are the gatekeeper. A great place to start is daily. Make sure you know how to print those reports and your team members are aware that you have the knowledge and that you're checking up on this on a regular basis. Also, after hours, so you can make sure that they know that you're looking at that. So don't be afraid to, you know, check everything after they're looking and know how that system's working. Make sure that system is being followed on a complete and regular basis. Verifying deposits and making sure you're in depth and you have that transparency. You are verbally communicating that system, also in writing. Controlling your incoming mail so you can make sure that employees don't take the opportunity to hide something from you physically that you're not aware of is coming through. And one of the key things now with our new technology is making sure you don't have a signature stamp. Many of those signature stamps, in my former experience as office manager, were used for prescriptions, you know, to stamp that, to give that patient the piece of paper when they walk out the door. Realistically, for your protection, your practice, your staff, all aspects, the number one thing you should do is not have a signature stamp. That gives a possible embezzler that has that chameleon characteristic too many opportunities to take use of that stamp. The next thing I want to talk about is proper use and permissions and controls in your practice management software. So doctors, you should look at your practice management software just like it is the pulse of your practice. This is the financial pulse of your practice. So just like we look at a patient, we look at their vitals and we have a system on how we're going to take care of this patient and what we have to make sure is completed before we start anything. Your practice management software is just like the pulse of your practice. It makes sure that you know what's going on while you're working on those patients. So the key thing to look for in this practice management software is who has permission to do what. You want to make sure that that's delegated. Not one person has permission to complete all transactions, and your team has to be accountable and answer to you and each other. This is where teamwork, this is a great definition of teamwork right here. Your administration access, you have tight controls. Pretty much you or one other person, your spouse, should be the only one that can make major changes to your software. Like I said, that's the pulse of your practice. If you're the practice owner, we recommend that you have 2 separate login and user IDs so that you have complete control over everything. One is more for administrative and one is, you know, completing chart notes and things like that. The main thing here is that you require regular password changes so that your team members, you know, sharing isn't caring in this situation. Even if they're not supposed to share their passwords, sometimes they may make it known to others. So it's one of those things where we don't want, it's not like the sandbox where we want everybody to share their toys. So you want to make sure everybody's changing their passwords on a regular basis, and that if I get up and I walk away, we have a lot of moving parts in our dental office, that if I'm not active and logged into my system, it's going to automatically log me out. You know, it's not just about other team members looking at things or seeing things they shouldn't. We have patients and different types of people walking in and out. So you need to make sure that everything has a timeout on it. And the number one thing that we'll see in a lot of people who like to embezzle is they want constant access to that pulse of your practice, right? They want to see that heartbeat going up and they want to be able to change that heartbeat. So in order to protect that flat line, really make sure no one has remote access to your software except for the practice owner. So after hours, you're the only one that can access any data.
Amber, is it okay if I go back to one of these for a second? Because I just want to,
Yeah.
the third point on the slide, practice owner has 2 login IDs. Really what we're talking about there is, as the practice owner, you need administrative access, but it's probably better if you're not logged in with that administrative access most of the time. So what we're really encouraging you to do is to have a second login that has kind of more or less the same powers that your receptionist has. And that's the one that you do most of your daily business in. And what that means is that if you are logged in your workstation and you have to go away to treat a patient, what you're logged in as is kind of a low power login ID and not an administrative one that somebody else can go and sit in your workstation and start changing things in the software. So you really need to reserve administrative access for when you actually need it, and that should not be your day-to-day login. That's really the point. That's right, Amber. I just wanted to go back to that to make sure that
Yeah.
people got that. Okay.
And the thing that I looked for that, you know, that's really kind of the pulse of the practice. That's where a lot of moving parts happen. So think of it as that.
Absolutely.
There are thousands of ways to steal, and we at Prosperitant know most of them, and we're uncovering new theft methodologies almost on a weekly basis. One of the issues that we struggle with in our Prosperitant team is trying to communicate with you how to look for embezzlement without actually giving away tips on how to embezzle in a public forum such as we're doing right now. Although there are thousands of ways to steal, each accounting transaction ends up with a reaction that we as investigators know to look for. But as non-investigators in your practice, what is it that you look for? Well, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners comes out with an annual report each year of theft that has been reported by certified fraud examiners, such as we are. Basically, what they continue to show year after year is that despite the industry, no matter if it's dental or healthcare or construction, whatever the industry, whatever the amount of theft is, be it $30,000 or $1 million, the actual technicality of the method is different or varies between each theft, but one thing that's consistent, one thing that is consistent is the behavior of the thief. And the two things that you want to look for the most when you're assessing behavior of your employees is how much time they want to spend alone working. We know that collusion doesn't happen very often in dentistry. There are some industries that it does, but it doesn't happen very often in dentistry. So if I'm not colluding with someone who's helping me steal from you, that means I have to be alone, which means I have to come in before everyone else. I have to stay later than everyone else. I can't take vacation because someone might look into my accounts and find out that there's something wrong. We've had several cases where the theft has been first suspected because the embezzler took vacation and the doctor had another employee answer the phones at the front desk. Well, lo and behold, a patient called saying, I got a statement and I don't see my cash payment on my statement, right? That's why an embezzler can't ever take off work. They always have to be there to manage their schemes. Another thing is that you find that they're not transparent and they're incredibly possessive and forceful of everything around them. Their workstation, their accounts receivable, their past due accounts. They don't want anyone else to have their hands in this or their eyes in it so that they can start seeing errors that are coming up or deleted payments that have come up somewhere. And then we discussed a little bit, or Dave is going to talk a little bit more about characteristics of a sociopath and a narcissist, which also plays along with the embezzler's personality or behavioral characteristics to watch for.
Absolutely. And this goes back to something that we touched on earlier. You know, the one-time embezzlers, the people who steal and get caught and leave dentistry or reform themselves, are a little bit different in their behaviors than the serial folks. And one of the things that we started realizing as the three of us were preparing for this was that a lot of the serial embezzlers that we've encountered are sociopathic and a bit narcissistic together. In other words, we tend to find those two in one place. And I wouldn't say that about the broader community of embezzlers. I would say it about the serial folks. So what does sociopathy look like? Well, superficial charm and intelligence is part of it. You know, these folks come off as people who are fun to be around generally. unreliability, untruthfulness. Probably the key defining characteristic of sociopathy is that you just don't feel bad about it. And certainly when we interview these folks, you know, as I think Wendy said earlier on, you know, they feel like, darn it, I deserve it. You will see antisocial behavior for them, and sometimes for no really good reason. They really don't think they'll get caught. And when I talk about my favorite serial embezzler, Irina, you know, I think every time she got caught, she was surprised by it. It's kind of like my mother-in-law who gets surprised by Christmas every year. And they just don't learn what you would think they would have the opportunity to learn from what's happened to them. I'm not making this stuff up. It's coming from something called DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. That's kind of the psychiatrist and psychologist Bible in terms of how they define different abnormal behavior. So that's sociopathy. Again, basically they don't really seem to care about consequences or the damages that they create for other people. And then we've got narcissism. And I think we all have some idea of what narcissism looks like, but let's make it explicit here. Self-importance, and where that comes out in a dental practice is these people look at you basically as a high-functioning moron with good hands. And in their mind, I think Amber said this early on, in their mind, the only reason that you're successful is that because they keep your chair full. And then when people get out of that chair, they collect the money. And they kind of look at you and them, and they see you as or they see themselves as being your equal. Whether that's true or not, that's their perception. And they kind of think you should make them your partner in the practice. And eventually, when they realize that that's not going to happen, they steal from you. Narcissists tend to be a little bit appearance obsessed. These are the people who will have hundreds of selfies on Facebook. You know, these are exaggerators, especially about themselves. I mentioned one of our serial embezzlers, Lisa George, early on, who claimed to have all kinds of degrees that she didn't have, and you know, that law degree that was just about finished. That's narcissism. They think that really only high status people can understand them. And they have this constant need for sort of adulation. Look at me. They lack empathy, and that's also to some extent a characteristic of sociopathy. And they covet what you have, and they think that if they just had, you know, a fancy car like you do, that people would think more of them. There's a real shallowness to narcissists, and you know, their emotions are right there in front of you, and they really crave that adulation. Again, when we started talking about it, we realized how a lot of embezzlers have characteristics of both narcissists and sociopaths, and a little bit of research I've done since I had that epiphany kind of reinforces it. So that's what these folks look like. Well, we could probably use a little bit of humor about now. And there's something we came up with that we call the serial embezzler's prayer. Let's all read it together. Please God, let my doctor wake up tomorrow and every day with all the goodness, kind-heartedness, trust, and altruism that you in your infinite wisdom bestowed, so that I may continue in the noble profession of embezzlement. And thank you, God, for the creativity that you granted me, so that I may continue my undetected accumulation of luxury goods. And please, Lord, allow me to continue your work by sparing the doctor from the sins of materialism and delaying the eventual loss to the world of his or her skills through retirement. And dear Lord, should I ever be caught, please ensure that this very goodness that makes him or her a great dentist and admired by all does not desert that dentist in my time of need. It always amazes me how many dentists don't report the embezzler because the dentist feels bad for that person. So that I may continue the Lord's work by stealing from some other unsuspecting sap, your sociopathic and narcissistic servant, the embezzler. And I know we're being facetious, but the majority of dentists I've met are such wonderful, nice, altruistic people. And embezzlers know that. The serial embezzlers will take advantage of it over and over again. So we can have a laugh here, but there's a lot of truth in what's here.
So you wrote that poem all by yourself, Dave?
All by myself.
You did?
I did. I was sitting at a conference one day, and
It just came to you.
I just realized how much embezzlers can take advantage of the really fundamental goodness that most dentists have.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've already told you, and you know quite clearly, we are prosperitant, and we have a gift for you coming up at the end of this presentation. But here's how we can help you, or we actually are very active in helping the dental industry. I kind of like to think of it as we're saving the dental industry. Maybe there's a bit of narcissism in me, Dave, that we're saving the dental industry. Anyway, ways that we can help. Number one, we can do a full-on embezzlement investigation for you. If you happen to feel that something is just not quite right, we can also do compliance examinations as well, where we actually go through your database and look at all the individual financial transactions that are happening. We also have a product offering called Office Protection System, which is actually one of Amber's specialties. The Office Protection System is a program in which we examine 25 or a little bit more than 25 highly functioning areas in your office, or protocols and systems, so that we can help you fine-tune them to decrease the risk of embezzlement within your practice. And then Dave, why don't you tell us about the pre-employment screening?
Absolutely, and this is a product that we hope to be offering soon, and it's where one of our skilled and experienced people will be able to help you with pre-employment screening and making sure that you're not hiring somebody who's got some baggage. It's a really complex area in a lot of ways, and it's a product that is not easily accessed by most practices, and something that we look forward to being able to offer you soon. So there will be some details coming out probably in the next few months. We have not finalized anything yet, but we get a lot of calls for this, and we're just in discussion with somebody right now who we think will be able to offer an excellent service to dental practices. So stay tuned for an announcement on that. One last thing I'll say about employment, and this was touched on earlier, but dentistry has really allowed itself to get out of step with how the rest of the world hires. And unfortunately, most dentists end up making hiring decisions with far less information than they really should have. And we're going to help you close that gap.
Yeah.
Okay, so here are some resources that we at Prosperitant can offer you. Now, I'm sorry, I've been writing like a whole lot of notes because we have a ton of questions, really good questions.
Right.
And ironically, a lot of them have to do with hiring. So we're going to answer those in just a bit. But one thing that I want to point out to you is one of the questions that we got was, what exactly can I ask when I call somebody, when I call a former employer, right? We'll talk about that during our question and answer portion of our webinar. But one thing I think is amazing, and this was David's brainchild, I believe, is that we've taken not only cases that have come from prosperitant, but have come from all over the United States and Canada, and we've created a central part of our website, and it's called the Hall of Shame. So basically, it's a list of people that have committed crimes or embezzlement related to dentistry. So although if you call a former employer of an embezzler, they may not be able to exactly tell you what went on with them, right? But what you can do is go to the Hall of Shame on the Prosperitant website, type in that person's name, and see what comes up for them. Now, you know, I want to be real careful because, and let you know that we're not, this is not like a guarantee of like a criminal records type of thing, but it can give you some type of idea. Another option that we have, or another resource we have, is called the Embezzlement Risk Assessment Questionnaire. We've talked a lot about behaviors as being one of the key indicators of if someone is embezzling from you or not. Prosperitant has developed a list of 30 or more key indicator behaviors that will let you know if you should begin searching a little bit more deeply about if an employee is embezzling from you or not. If you will send an email request to request@dentalembezzlement.com, Dave has agreed to give that ERAC list of behaviors to everyone who is attending our webinar today, and he's going to do it for no charge. So that's kind of you for that, Dave. Thank you. Well, I know my clients absolutely love that. Don't forget that Dave has a book on Amazon. You can see that mine is well worn. And it is called The Art of Theft and the Science of Control. It's an easy read. It's a well-rounded read. It's a well-rounded look at embezzlement in the dental industry. And I'm not just saying that because I love David Harris and I think he's brilliant. I'm saying that because this is an excellent book with excellent information. Yeah. Okay. And then also, we love bringing you guys webinars. We love that you're interested in protecting your practice against embezzlement, and we love that you're relying on us as a source for that. So much so that we believe that offering free webinars with this information is incredibly important. If you have a moment and you've enjoyed this webinar and you've learned from the information that we're offering you for no charge, would you please do us a favor and go on Google and leave us a review about how we've done or how Prosperitant has impacted the dental industry altogether. If you would do that for us, we would really appreciate it.
Perfect. Well, if you need to reach us for any reason, there's how to do it. Our email addresses are all there. The website, the toll-free number. Feel free to reach out to any one of us or to call the number or contact us through the website if you have questions or you want to talk about your practice. We would love to help. There's some of our team that was taken last year at our head office in Halifax, Canada. You can see Amber and Wendy are kind of the bookends, and I'm somewhere in the middle. Yeah, that's it, Wendy. And at that, I'd like to thank my delightful co-hosts. You know, it's such pleasure working with them, and we put a lot of time into preparing for these things. And I've got to say, they're so much fun to work with, and they have so many good ideas that you know, this webinar series that we're doing has just been a labor of love, I think, for me and probably for my co-hosts as well. At that, ladies, fire away.
You want to go, Amber, or you want me to go?
Oh, Dave, here's a great question. If you find someone stealing money, how do you get the money before letting them go?
Oh, that's a great question, and it's one that I get asked a lot when people call and they have concerns about embezzlement. And really, the way the question is often phrased to me is, should I keep this person around or should I fire them? Because investigations usually take 6 or 8 weeks to happen. Do I need to keep them around for that period of time? And the answer is you absolutely do not. If you've caught somebody stealing, step one is fire them. Step two, investigate, document, and then you can work on getting your money back. But what people don't always realize is that you don't lose any recourse by letting that person go. In other words, there's no need to kind of catch them red-handed or have them still working there when prosperitant gives you the final report.
Right, and Dave, that also that topic falls in nicely with what we're going to be talking about in August, in our August webinar,
Yeah.
right?
It absolutely does. The other part of that question was how to get the money back, and we'll talk about that next week. But next month. There are really 3 ways you can do it. The first is that you all have some insurance coverage for this. The typical amount that practices have is $25,000, which isn't a lot. But if somebody's stolen that amount or less, you get it back from insurance. Beyond that, you're working on either getting money back from the thief, which sometimes can be a challenge, or if somebody's been cashing your checks, you have the ability to go after the bank that allowed those checks to be cashed. So those are the other ways to get money back, but they really have nothing to do with, they don't require you to prolong somebody's employment.
Okay, I have a statement I'd like to make and then 2 questions for you, which are related. Our very own Kelly Paxton, who works with Prosperitant and who coined the term pink collar crime, made the statement to be consistent with open source intelligence when you're doing research on social media. Because if you don't apply the same standards to each individual applicant and what you're looking at in social media, it could be considered to be unfair hiring practices. And so she suggests if you're going to look on social media at your applicants that you have a checklist and you apply that consistently among every applicant that you have. So thanks, shout out to Kelly Paxton for that. Okay, so 2 questions. Number 1, how do you handle it when someone works for someone else at the current time and they don't want you to call their current employer for a reference? That was a question by Maureen. And the other question is, what can you legally ask when calling a reference or calling for a reference?
2 awesome questions. Let's tackle that first one. So we're often faced with this problem where we get somebody who's applying for a job, but they say, please don't contact my current employer because she doesn't know that I'm looking. And as somebody who's looking to hire somebody, there's an obvious danger here. This may be true, or it may be that the person applying for work with you actually got fired 3 weeks ago, and this is their way of preventing you from calling an employer who just fired you. So when you get that, here's what I recommend you do. You say to that employer, you say to that applicant, look, I understand that completely, and I would never want to get you in trouble with your current employer. But I'm going to tell you that we don't hire anybody without speaking with their most recent employer. But if that's going to be awkward for you now, I'm happy to put that to the end of the process. And we'll check off all the other boxes first and then make that call after we've made a written offer of employment to you, subject to that phone call. And when you tell somebody that, what you're doing is really a little exercise in differential diagnosis. If the person who's applying is playing a game with you, what you just told them is you're not going to get hired because I must have that conversation with your former employer. If it's a legitimate request from somebody who really is still working there, then you've accommodated them, you've created a structure where you're not going to put them in a difficult position, and they should appreciate that.
Wendy, I got so wrapped up in answering that question that I forgot the other one. Can you give me a reminder?
Legally, what questions can you legally ask when calling for a reference?
You can pretty much ask anything as long as it's not of a discriminatory nature. I'll go back to something. So Kelly Paxton, who we mentioned a minute ago, for those of you who don't know Kelly, she works with us. Kelly's a private investigator with a very and certified fraud examiner with a very extensive law enforcement background. And Kelly is the world's leading expert on what's called pink collar crime. In other words, female committed embezzlement. So what Kelly was saying was, we need to treat all applicants equally. And that's true when we're looking at social networking or anything else. If hiring practices are differentially applied to different groups, the equal opportunities legislation will get you in trouble. So for example, you cannot give Hispanic applicants a literacy test, but not apply the same thing to applicants where English is their first language. That would be discriminatory. So we can't ask questions that would be discriminatory. For example, in most states, a woman's family planning, you know, whether she's planning to have children or not, and when is something that is considered discriminatory to inquire. So you can't ask the applicant that question. You also can't ask a former employer. Aside from that, you can ask them anything you want. The important questions to ask, though, are, first of all, don't ever skip over this question. Would you rehire this person? Okay, that's the absolute best question you can ask a former employer, because anything other than yes, of course, should concern you. The second question you really must ask is the applicant's start date with that employer and their end date, because you want to compare those to what the applicant told you in case they're trying to hide a job that they don't want you to know about. And the third thing that you really need to ask a former employer is, what was this person's job title when they left you? A lot of applicants will give themselves the upgrade to first class. In other words, in their last job, they worked as receptionist, but when they're submitting a resume to you, it's magically become office manager. And if you ask the former employer that question, of course, you'll catch the applicant in a deception, and somebody who lies to you on the way in the door is not going to be a great employee to have after that.
Yeah.
All right. Any others you ladies see that we should tackle?
Yeah, I have a great question. Please go in more depth about roll-up reports and after activities. What exactly should the practice owner be looking for?
Okay, so what we mean by a roll-up report is today is Wednesday. So when you print, and reports have different names in different practice management software, what I'm going to talk about is a day-end report. So most software, all software in fact, has a summary that comes out at the end of the day that says, here are the fees, here are the collections that came in, here are the adjustments that were made. And that's your primary report for looking at your end of day. We did a session back in May called Reconcile or Reckless, where we went into a lot of detail here. And I'd encourage you, if you didn't see that webinar live, to go and dig it out on our website and look at it, because there's a lot of good information on what you're looking for at the end of the day. What we mean by a roll-up report is this. The report I want to see at the end of Wednesday is one that is from when the office closed, let's say 5 p.m. on Tuesday, until the end of Wednesday. If the report I get is a Wednesday report only, then what could have happened is somebody could have come in at night on Tuesday and done some transactions, and I won't see them if I specify today as the date only, and I don't go back to the last report that I have. So if the last report I have is from 5 p.m. Tuesday, now I want to go from there until the end of today. That's what we mean by a roll-up report.
Right. And can I add to that, Dave?
You bet.
Okay, so the other thing with after hours activities is when you look at your password and security settings, you want to make sure, like how we talked about, you don't want anybody to have remote access to your system, because if they had the accessibility to get in there and enter procedures or enter anything that they shouldn't have. So that's where that also plays into remote access for just you.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that we have talked about in other sessions is, sorry, lost my train of thought there, Todd. One of the things that we talked about in other sessions is looking at the burglar alarm log. It's called sometimes the entry log or the access log, and that tells you if somebody's coming into your practice after hours. One of the dangers of staff having remote access is that now they can sneak into the practice without having to arm or disarm that alarm. In other words, they can do it in a virtual sense instead of a physical sense. So I agree completely with Amber. We want to cut down people's ability to do stuff after hours unnoticed. And if we pull the plug on remote access, we get a lot better ability to detect them.
Mm-hmm. I have another question that goes into that, Dave. What if your software only pulls days and you're not able to back to the prior day at 5 o'clock?
I've yet to see software that will actually do that. I think if you're having that problem, you probably need to ask that question of your software trainer or whoever your local expert is. Because I've never seen software where you can't specify a longer period than this morning to this afternoon for a day inventory.
Right.
And if it really was an obstacle, I suspect the way you could transcend it would be to go and reprint. You know, again, we're having this conversation on a Wednesday. If you went back to your software and reprinted Tuesday, that should catch transactions that happened after hours on Tuesday, and then Wednesday would bring it up to date.
Right.
Dave, I'd like to share something that Tabitha, I lost it, that Tabitha shared. And she says, FYI, in Dentrix, you can turn on the verify user to add a second level to the login for each access point. Example, if the doctor is logged in and has access to admin areas, the system will prompt for password before allowing access. That way, if they leave their station while logged in and someone else sits down and tries to access critical areas, they are still blocked due to the verification steps.
Yeah,
so
that's a great point.
That's some really good information. Thank you, Tabitha.
Yeah, Tabitha is a consultant and a friend of ours and knows a whole lot about Dentrix. The other thing I'll mention too on the same theme is that there's some software now that will support biometric readers. So this is a fingerprint device, and these things used to be really expensive when they first came out, but the hardware for biometric reader now is very cheap. I mean, you can find them. I've seen prices kind of from $30 to $70 for a biometric reader. So that's another way to create an additional level of security rather than passwords. Where that's particularly important in my mind is when your employee hours are being kept in your practice management software, because it's a chronic problem where people sort of log each other in and out, and the biometric reader kind of shuts that down really nicely.
Another question that I had, Dave, by Christine was, has there been an increase in embezzlement due to COVID? And I'd like to take that as a two-part question. I'd like to take the first part. What I've noticed in my caseload is that it has increased. And the reason that what I hear my clients saying is, they had to be shut down for a couple of months or are still shut down due to COVID. And since they have this extra time, they're trying to be efficient and go through their practice reset their protocols and their procedures, and they're reviewing their reports to look at their financials. And when they're reviewing the reports, they're finding a lot of anomalies that they would not normally find if they hadn't taken the time to look at the reports. So from my end, yes, as an investigator, I've seen an increase. I don't know if it's actually due to COVID, other than just doctors have more time on their hands now. Do you want to take the second part of that, Dave?
Absolutely, and my experience has paralleled that of Wendy. You know, the other thing is, as was said earlier in our presentation, a lot of people steal for two reasons. You know, they either steal to address an ego deficit or a financial one. Well, there are a lot of people right now who suddenly are in financial trouble. You know, let's face it, COVID has caused people to lose their jobs. There's a big adjustment going on in the economy. You know, Wendy and Amber and I were talking before we started. Wendy's husband is an airline pilot, and fortunately, he's not facing layoff. But you know, there are a lot of airlines, for example, who have a lot more people right now than they really need, and they're laying them off. And if you have somebody working for you whose spouse loses their job, it creates financial issues. So that's the other part of the COVID issue right now. Christine, who asked that question, is Christine Geary. She's one of our investigators. And yeah, thanks, Christine. Glad to have you with us.
Dave, what is required to file theft issues with insurance?
I'll give a kind of self-serving answer to that. Normally the report that we give you at the end of the investigation is what both law enforcement and your insurance company need. It's pretty rare these days that an insurance company will ask us even a single question. Wendy, you've been at this for a while. I mean, how often in one of your reports do we get any kind of meaningful questioning from an insurance company these days? Whoops, lips are moving, nothing coming out there, Wendy.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I don't know. I've fought insurance companies pretty hard. Generally, each of them will have a list of documentation that they require. One thing that I love about the prosperitant final report of findings or theft report is that it generally has about 99% of the questions that the insurance company is going to ask and the documentation that they require. We include that in our final report. However, sometimes they like to get forensic accountants involved in it. I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of the same as if you're filing dental claims, right? How often does the dental insurance company fight you tooth and nail over paying a claim? It's the same with a theft claim. That's why I think our reports are so valuable in that process. But does that answer your question? There's a lot, and that's another reason, great reason why you should hire a prosperitant. There's just a lot. It's very detailed.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Can I say that? That's not real encouraging, but it's the truth. It's the truth, as we like to say down here in Texas. I mean, you just got to say it, right?
Yeah.
But Maureen wants to know also, is it legal to have cameras put in the office and not tell employees?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on your state. And about 30 states are what are called one-party consent states. And that means that one party to a conversation or an interaction between people can authorize the recording. The other 20 odd states are what are called two-party states. And that requires both parties to a conversation, or all parties, if there are multiple ones, to consent to recording. So if you're in a two-party state, or I think an all-party state might be a better label, then you can't do it. the employees would have to know. And furthermore, patients or whoever else comes in the office would need to be aware as well. So that's where you need the cameras, where you need a sign that tells people that you have cameras in place. In a one-party state, again, where you can kind of unilaterally consent, you could do it. Do I think it's a good idea? Not really. Sooner or later, your employees will probably find out, when they wonder what's in that room that's always kept locked, in the practice. Certainly if you're doing it and you haven't told your employees, you're going to lose a lot of face with them. So I don't recommend hidden cameras. I think if you're going to do cameras, make them overt and tell people you're doing it. The other thing I'll say, and I know Wendy and Amber this will probably parallel their experience. We've been at this for a long time, and the number of thefts that we've seen caught on camera is pretty small. The basic practical problem that people forget is this. If your office is open 35 hours a week, and let's say that you need 2 cameras to cover the front desk properly, you're now shooting 70 hours a week of front desk camera video. My basic question to the audience is, when are you going to watch it? Even if you sped it up 5-to-1, which makes people look comical in what they're doing, that's still 14 hours of video to watch each week. So the problem with video is monitoring. It's a little bit different if you know or you suspect embezzlement. I mean, at that point, sure, you can install video. But what I'd say is, if you know you have embezzlement, you're going to fire the people anyway.
Yeah.
I think I have one last question, and it was about what type of insurance covers fraud and theft.
Oh, yeah, we didn't tell people that, did we? Again, we'll get into more detail on this next month when we talk about kind of the aftermath of embezzlement. The coverage is in your property insurance, so it's the same stuff that covers fires and floods. And since my co-hosts are in Texas, I'll add tornadoes. And so it's your property insurance that has the coverage. The specific coverage is called employee dishonesty coverage. And the default amount that's in most policies is $25,000. Now, I'll just mention that the average embezzlement that we see is about $100,000. So one suggestion I'll make is this would be a great time to think about calling your insurance agent who sold you your property insurance and asking what the cost is of increasing that coverage. And a lot of times that cost is pretty small. I mean, sometimes it's $20 or $25 a month to increase your coverage to something a little more meaningful, and that would probably be a really good thing to do. I think we've covered most of the questions. I would again like to thank my partners in crime or in crime prevention, Wendy and Amber, for being with us. When Wendy said something that will mean something to all you folks, or displayed something that will mean something to all those folks in Texas. And we enjoyed having you and fielding some fantastic questions tonight. We will be back on August the 19th, same time, so 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. We'll be sending everybody out some invitations later. The end of webinar emails that you get each time have gone out already, so you should have that by now. So that's how to get your continuing education credit and how to look at our past webinars and things like that. Today's recording will be up on our website tomorrow. So if you had to duck out in the middle, it'll be there, and we'll send something out to you with a link to that. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Please stay far away from COVID, and we look forward to being back with you in about a month.
Okay. Bye.
This concludes this episode of the Prosperitant webinar series. The team will be back soon with more tools and ideas. If you have questions about this webinar, if you would like to discuss your practice with one of us, or if there is a topic you would like to see in a future webinar, we would love to hear from you. You can contact Prosperitant through its website, www.prosperitant.com, or by calling 888-398-2327.